Our next speaker in the student lightning round is Jamie Laatsch. Jamie's one of the NEFA National Needs Fellows that helped put on this conference, and Jamie's research centers on human and policy dimensions of natural resource management. Jamie, you know how to work the microphone, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay? Am I microphoning? Okay. Okay, excited to be here. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, lightning round. Like I said, I'll sprint through it, but I'm going to try and give you sort of an intro to some of the research I've been working on this summer with my major professor, Jiao Ma, having to do with Forest Service perspectives on forest management in a changing climate. So this will be sort of what I'll run through quickly: purpose, background, the methods we use, some really interesting preliminary findings that we've come across, and our plans moving forward. So the preliminary findings are going to be sort of just the chunk that I thought was most interesting so far, and this will be just sort of a warm-up to what we're hoping to do later on in the future. So sort of the three key parts to the research. There's a more theoretical aspect about organizational problem-solving frameworks, how the Forest Service as an institution is taking on climate change, but I'm going to skip that for today. We'll stick with the more practical: how well have the Forest Service's plans to adapt to climate change been implemented, and if not so well, why not? So we picked the Forest Service, and we also picked the Intermountain West as our target geographic area. For us, that means parts of regions 1 through 4 of the Forest Service, but not all of them. So the circle's not great, but if you imagine state boundary lines, we're including Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Another important thing, we did a literature review, and learned from academia that federal land management agencies in general, and also the Forest Service, are making plans to adapt to climate change. They're making efforts, but they're still struggling with implementation. So what we were interested in was some of the barriers, but also really talking to the employees and finding out what they think potential solutions could be. What kind of tools and resources do you need to better manage or to better address climate change? And in these regions, for our research, we did some interviews, and we also are doing an online survey. And we're interviewing and surveying employees at different levels of the agency. So that's another important thing that we hope to look at, is the comparison. How do people at the regional office answer these questions compared to a forest supervisor's office, compared to a ranger district office? So we're really excited to see if opinions differ at different levels of the agency. So after that literature review, and academia were telling us that the Forest Service and others were struggling with implementation, we wanted to look a little bit deeper. We went straight to the Forest Service and found that their three key sort of climate change plans or documents were the strategic framework, a national roadmap, and a corresponding performance scorecard. So the first two are sort of where they lay out their objectives, what they want to do, what they hope are going to be their plans to adapt to climate change. And the scorecard is sort of their own way to monitor themselves and to really track their own implementation as far as how well they've achieved these goals. So here's a copy of the scorecard. There's 10 elements. I sort of made bigger versions of the titles over there, everything from employee education and training to developing or putting in place a climate change coordinator to vulnerability assessments. They've got all these key elements with corresponding questions, and each year every unit or national forest is expected to answer each of these 10 questions with yes or no, and then sort of explain why. But this is the key for us for sort of our proof or our idea of how well and why the Forest Service is implementing their plans, and then if not very well, we're going to look into that. But so the Forest Service set a goal for itself. They hope 100% of their units will answer yes to 7 of those 10 items I showed by 2015. They did a baseline assessment in 2011. So I guess I should say the strategic framework came out in 2008, the roadmap in 2010. So in 2011, they did a sort of baseline assessment and found that 16% of their units had achieved that 7 out of 10, and 47% were able to say yes to 5 or 6 out of 10. So it's something, it's a start for sure, but when you really look at it, less than 50% of their units are able to say yes to half of those original goals. So we wanted to look for areas of improvement. Where can they get better? How can we sort of help them out here? So after the literature review, we decided to do a handful of key informant interviews to see if our questions were on track, see what was relevant to these different employees, and just sort of get an idea of where to start for our online survey. We had a very small sample, so this isn't going to be representative of the whole Forest Service, but we did learn a few sort of really interesting things. The first is that there's a lot of confusion about this scorecard. It's new, but a lot of people either had heard of it but had never seen it, didn't know who's responsible for it, and didn't know, was anything going to actually happen if my forest doesn't, meet these goals or fill it out or whatever the case was. There's a lot of confusion about it, and so there's some room for improvement there. And there was also the sense that there's too much information coming out of a bunch of different sources. People on the ground especially were sort of feeling overwhelmed. They knew that there's information out there, but their sense was sort of, yeah, it's out there for those with time and interest. I just don't have the time. So then we made our online survey. We're planning to send the survey to about 3,500 people, and so far we've only sent the survey to regional employees. We sent those out maybe early September, and we're going to wait for the rest of the people after fire season and all this other lovely craziness is over. But so far we've sent out 230 and got 40% response rate back. So we're pretty happy, but we're really excited to send out the rest of those and finish analyzing all our results. The people we surveyed, we did a sort of a census of everyone in that geographic region I pointed out who fit our criteria. And our criteria were essentially, we wanted to hear from people who were managers and specialists and planners and administrators who had sort of a real hand in managing the national forests and their resources, the natural resources. People we maybe didn't include would be IT specialists, HR personnel, maybe facilities staff. But everyone who sort of fit that criteria got an email from us and hopefully had a chance to fill out the survey. So we asked them a ton of questions, but we're going to focus on the communication of climate change information just for this talk. We learned that the #1 way people are getting information about climate change is through informal conversations, talking to each other, talking to different people. The second and third most common were research papers, first from the Forest Service research stations and second from outside the Forest Service. The important thing to take away from here, we also asked them to rank how effective they thought it was. The key thing here is that those two, minus the research papers from the research stations, those were pretty good, but the other two #1 ways of receiving information weren't ranked as most effective. So we thought that was kind of interesting. And the email communication tended to be the least effective for people. We also asked them about forest resilience and climate change. We said, to what extent do you think those two things should be prioritized by forest managers? And we thought it was interesting. Forest resilience, a majority ranked it that they thought it should be more highly prioritized than climate change. And so that brings up questions about the wording. Do people not like the word climate change? Maybe forest resilience is something they feel a little more comfortable with. That's something we're going to look into for sure. We asked, and again, sorry, these are all just responses from regional employees at this point. So everything I'm talking about is how regional employees have answered questions. We asked them how confident they felt being heard as far as providing feedback or sharing ideas with the Washington office, and many of them were not confident at all. And so we're thinking, okay, our next group of people are going to be forest level people and district people. This is going to get interesting. But here's the take home. So some of the things from what we've learned just in this initial sort of preliminary findings have led us to believe that some keys for the Forest Service are going to be to simplify and prioritize. Find those types of communications that are most effective and focus on those. Don't sort of bombard people with hundreds of emails a day or a bunch of different methods. Find something that you think will work and really focus your energy on that so that the message is getting across to all the people at the different levels. Find some common ground. So I know forest resilience has a lot of different definitions based on who you ask, but maybe that's something that more people can get on board with, or the idea of stewardship. In our interviews, a lot of people mentioned, people who work for the national forests in the national forests really do have this desire to leave the land in the best possible condition for future generations, regardless of how they feel about climate change. So maybe stewardship or resilience or something else can be sort of a rallying point, a way to build morale and get employees more engaged and excited about trying to adapt to climate change. And then finally, improve that feedback loop. I think there's a lot the Washington office can learn from people on the ground who have real experiences with these issues and maybe have gotten to know some of the stakeholders and local conditions. So improve that feedback loop and really start listening to all the different levels of what the employees have to say. So how to make this worthwhile? We obviously are going to try and publish papers, and we're academics, but we also really want to come up with some sort of one-page brief or brochure or really short talk that we can share with the units and with the Forest Service that just sticks to the practical. What can you benefit from this stuff we've learned? What's most interesting, and what are some recommendations we might have? So we're working on that. Hopefully spring or summer we'll have something cool to show everybody. Maybe. And that's it. Thank you to my incredible committee for their support and help, and I will take any questions.
Thank you. This is a really interesting talk and applies a lot to what we're doing. And regarding your last point about next summer having something to take to Forest Service personnel, do you have an idea yet how you're going to do that? I'm just curious because we often struggle with that because we have, regional offices for Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife, National Parks, and how. Yeah, I'm just curious to see how you envision getting that information to them.
We've made some contacts in the Climate Change Advisor's office, and through our interviews and some of these other processes, I've gotten to know some forest supervisors and other people at different units, and so some of them have sort of just directly to us said, we'd love to have you out to our national forest, our office, and then the Climate Change Advisor's office is interested in having us talk. I think they have like a monthly climate change coordinator conference call or something, so we might get on there and talk for a few minutes or email maybe regional foresters or the Climate Change Advisor's office like a really short presentation or a video or something that they can share at their own meetings, even if they don't want us there. So we're still sort of working on ideas, but that's what we've come up with so far. Yeah. Any other questions? Do we have time? Okay. Okay. Cool.